Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're back on our podcast for the PARSHA, weekly PARSHA with the RAMBAN. And we want to go on chapter 34 in Torah Bereshit, Parashat VaYishlach, Pasuk 25 and 26. Jacob just read them. Basically, we find something a little bit bizarre, that Jacob's daughter, what was her name? Dina, was raped by a prince. What was the name of the prince? SHECEM. The tribes of Israel, Jacob's son, Yaakov Abinu's son, have the entire city, including the prince and his father, the king, and all the males do Brit Milah. It says very clearly here on the passage 25th that they go and kill every single male, right? And they also kill the prince and his father, and then afterwards they ransack the whole city and take the spoils. So now we want to go into how exactly were they permitted to do this. So this is a fascinating machloket between the Rishonim. Exactly, for lack of a better way, the Jews, the tribes of Yaakov, I was just telling you, are acting a little bit like, more like Mohammed Islamic style. Killing the entire city out. And so the Rambam actually says, we know, the non-Jews also have a place in heaven. You know that. 7, they go to heaven if they keep 7 commandments. One of the 7 commandments is what? That the non-Jews have to have a court system. So if part of the court system is that they need to prosecute people that rape one another. So the Maimonides, Rab Moshe ben Maimon, and we're going to go deeper into it, says that, I'm just giving an overview now, says basically since the tribes, the king and the court system, the chief justice and the people of the city sat by and laughed when Jacob's daughter was raped, so if you are complicit and don't prosecute a person, a violator, so it meant that the city was like an anarchy. They weren't keeping that commandment of having a proper court system. That's why the Rambam says the Shimon and Levi were, right? It's unfathomable to say that Shimon and Levi didn't keep the 7 commandments, because they probably even kept the rest, a lot of the Torah that we keep voluntarily. So for sure, the grandsons of Abraham, the great-grandsons of Abraham, the grandsons of Yitzchak, the sons of Yaakov would keep the 7 commandments. So they're heter, what was their permission under Torah law is that they saw this city, right? Because non-Jews have 7 commandments. Do you know the 7? They can't curse God, they can't do idol worship, they can't steal, they can't do sexual immorality, like the severe ones, like sleeping with married women or homosexuality. They can't they can't abuse animals. They can't rip off. They have to kill an animal before they devour its food. They can't rip off limbs of live animals. And also,
the court system.
They have to have a court system. Those are the 7. Since they didn't keep the court system, that's why they were chayav mitah. Because non-Jews only have to keep 7. But you know what the punishment is for not keeping one of these 7? Death penalty.
Yeah.
That's a Gemara in Sanhedrin. You should once learn the Gemara. It's fascinating. Nachmanides argues on this. Nachmanides says you don't have to come on to that. It could be that they had a functional court system. Now this one, they didn't prosecute the prince, whatever.
Right.
But he says you don't have to come on to that, Maimonides. It's actually very deep. You know why? He says because who says they even kept any of them? They were doing idol worship. Right. They were doing Gilui Arayot, they probably were sleeping with each other's wives. Presumably, it was a corrupt, right? These weren't, because we see later in the Torah, the reason why God tells the Jews, I'm kicking out all these nations from the Holy Land is because they get the Torah that I gave you, they didn't keep any of it, right? They would sacrifice their children.
Right.
So the Ramban says actually this was more of taking revenge against them, which means they were in the code. What they did was not murder the sons of Yaakov, Shimon and Levi, because anyways these people had the death penalty, not necessarily for not keeping a court system, but for being idolaters and adulterers, like, you know, being.
Yes.
But he says, this is just a question that if we know that the tribes of Israel are all supposed to be angelic, like Levi is supposed to be the grandfather of Aaron, which is peace.
Right.
So how could they kill innocent people? So the Ramban, like we said, says that one of the 7 commandments of the non-Jews is what, Jacob? That they have to have a court system. And like we said, do you know what the punishment? You know, there's 4 types of ways capital punishment. That a person that commits a capital crime in Judaism could be stoned to death, burnt, hung, or sayaf with a sword, off with his head with a sword. It says a non-Jew. Did you know when we had a Sanhedrin, all non-Jews that were living in Israel would be prosecuted by the Jewish Supreme Court. You know that? If like there were 2 witnesses that this non-Jew did idol worship, they would, or stole even a penny. So it says that the punishment for a non-Jew not keeping one of his 7 commandments is the sword, death by the sword, decapitation, and now, this is the thing the Rambam says. It says, let's say you're a witness to a capital, one of these 7 crimes, 7 sins that non-Jew does, right? And let's say you don't bring it to the judge. You don't bear witness. So he says that person himself now has the death penalty. Right? Because he's so he says basically everybody in the city knew that this gentleman, the prince Shechem, had raped Yaakov's daughter Dina, and they didn't do. Oh, and it's very interesting. The Rambam says this is a type of stealing when you rape from somebody, because you're stealing their virginity.
Right. We have knowledge of exactly how the people knew that this was being done, because that's also important. Like
we know how we knew it was because Thing became infatuated. We read in the PARSHA that after he slept with Dina, he said, I love her, I want her.
Yeah, he wanted.
Then the tribes came and said, it's a shame. It's the most shameful thing for us to marry people that are uncircumcised. So come circumcised, then we'll...
That's when they found out?
Yeah, so they knew. Everybody knew. Because, like you were saying a few minutes ago, these are villages with not millions of people.
Right.
A few dozen, a few hundreds of people.
Small town, anyway.
Small town. So they saw that the prince is hanging around with a foreign tribeswoman.
Got it.
And he was a public figure.
Of course.
Right? So he kind of, after he raped Dina, he kind of took her captive.
Got it.
She said, I want her as my princess. So, but that the tribes had this plan, this trick up their sleeve the whole time. Like, initially, premeditatively, when they told them, do brit, they waited for the 3rd day, which is the most painful day, for them to take him out. Now here, the Ramban doesn't like the Rambam's explanation of why the tribes wiped out the city. He says, he says, if this is true, then why didn't Yaakov
himself
participate in the killing?
Right, the father of all halacha.
Yeah. So he says, if you say that Yaakov was afraid from these people, then why was he mad? Because, later he curses out. Over this episode, he curses Levi.
Right.
And Shimon. He says, Arur apam.
Right.
Cursed be their
anger,
because and you know that he punished them. He said, never, I want Shimon and Levi to be co-conspirators. I'm going to spread them out. When he blesses them, he says the Levis can't always be concentrated. They have to be spread out amongst the 12 tribes, and also Shimon also. Shimon is the Sofer. They write Sefer Torah, Megillah, and Mezuzah, and Tefillin, and they should also.
Wow, that's a great rebuttal. So what's the answer? Why didn't Yaakov himself? If this was acceptable.
So it says, Va'alu hem zachu v'asu mitzvah. So it says, according to the Rambam, if they were doing a mitzvah by enforcing the 7, you're saying that the Rambam basically is saying that
legally they deserve to be.
Legally they deserve to die. Why? This was a dysfunctional city. You could get away with any crime. And such a city, the whole city needs to be murdered.
So what was the
Not murdered. There's a difference between murder and killing. We Jews are allowed to kill somebody that wants to kill us. Murder we're never allowed to do in cold blood. But this was not murder. Because they were guilty of the death penalty under Torah. Why? Why? Because they didn't have a functional court system, and that's a no-no.
What was Yaakov Avinu's judgment on it?
So no, the Ramban says that he has a whole different take on it. He says the fidati dinim shematzuz b'shalom yisod shonein havana la'ashiv dainim b'chopla. He says that according to the Ramban, he says that the non-Jews, the Gentiles, have to have a court system doesn't mean that they have to have a every district needs to have a small court system. It means that they have to have on their law books, like that it's forbidden to steal, it's forbidden to rape, it's forbidden to not pay your worker,
Right.
Like the Torah is very.
So did they?
Dina, and like you need to be not negligent when you watch your friend's stuff, and you can't rape people, and you can't damage your friend, and you have to pay back your loan.
Did Shechem have that?
So he says for sure, if a non-Jew doesn't pay back his loan, right, steals and embezzles and frauds, according to Torah law, he is the death penalty. That is true. You understand? Or like you go damage under the Torah law, if you are mad at your friend and you go burn down his field, what's the punishment you get? The non-Jew death penalty. ובכלל המצווה זו שישבו דנים בכל עיר בישראל, אבל אם לא עשו זאת, אין הנהרגים. Oh wow, this is something I never knew. He says they have to do that, but he says this is a positive commandment for the non-Jews, right? Because we Jews have negative commandments and positive commandments. He says if they are dysfunctional and allow anarchy and don't set up a good court system, they don't get killed, according to the Ramban. That's a very interesting. He holds different. He argues on the Rambam. Because he says the Talmud in Sanhedrin says only if they do a negative commandment. Because also in Jewish law, you never get the death penalty for not doing a positive commandment.
Right.
You only get karet for not doing Brit Milah.
Positive commandments? The 7?
Yeah, they proactively have to have a court system. So the Ramban is saying that they didn't do anything negative, right? They just didn't have a functional. So he says, in my opinion, a non-Jew doesn't get the death penalty. Only if a non-Jew does a negative action, like idol worship, or proactively goes in.
According to him, the Shimon and Levi were murderers?
No, he's going to give a different answer. It's just a different, me and you always have different
reason of why.
Yeah. He says a different reason.
He still justifies it.
Yeah. So he says, he just says something. He says you should know this, that the non-Jews are guilty of death penalties if they do a proactive negative thing. But then, by them be passively not doing the positive action of having a functional court system, according to Nachmanides, which were commentary, Rav Moshe ben the Ramban, he says they don't get the death penalty. So he says, in the Talmud Yerushalmi, like if there's a corrupt judge, or if he gets bribery, then we kill the judge. because that he's proactively doing something wrong. You understand?
Yes.
There's something that passively you add something.
Absolutely. Got it. Good example.
בדיני ישראל כל דין שאתה יודע שממנו יהיה אתה רשאי לברוח ממנו וכל שאתה יודע ממנו רשאי אבל בדיניהם אף על פי שאתה שלם ממנו הוא רשאי לברוח ממנו מכאן יש להראות שגוי רשאי לומר לבעלי דינין אינו נזדק להם כי רק הוספה. So he says, let's say a judge himself, a non-Jewish judge, is worried that he's going to get killed by the mafia if he doesn't judge them. That doesn't mean that that judge is under, if the Jewish courts, Supreme Court finds out, we kill that judge. You understand? Because only the Jews have that halacha that they shouldn't be, one of the hardest commandments, by the way, parenthetically, there's a whole list of the hardest commandments of the Torah. You know one of them is? If you're a judge, and the head of the Russian Israeli mafia says, I'm going to kill you and your wife and kids if you don't give a corrupt, you can't be scared.
Right.
He says a non-Jew in that case doesn't have to take the case. He could say, no, I don't want to judge this. Sometimes the judge says, vacate, I don't give it to another court. Right. So he says for sure a non-Jew that passively didn't enforce, he says by them not going and punishing their prince doesn't mean they deserve the death penalty. So he argues adamantly against the Rambam. So he says another answer. He says an interesting answer, the Ramban. You know what he says? He says that Ulam Asbar Inyan Shechem Mishem and Shechem Ayurashem. He says, first of all, you have to understand, these people were evil. Okay? Like Sodom. Shechem, Sodom. This is the Ramban's understanding of this whole episode.
Yes.
Just like he says, these people were evil.
And
he says, anyways, even with them not raping Dina, they could have been taken out by Yaakov's son because they were idol worshippers. Right? And he says, Mesa ab Chordan, like water, Yaakov Avinu's children had halachic permission to take these people out. If not for the reason that we Jews are not a religion of suicide bombers and vigilantes and trying to kill everybody we see, but you should know that non-Jews are not, it's a very, very bad crime to do idol worship, even for a non-Jew. And these people were definitely of that idol worshippers.
But this was against Yaakov's will, and the sons knew it.
No, we're going to get to that. So he says that, so according to the Ramban, it's kind of like tricky a little bit. Definitely Yaakov Avinu's sons, let me put it back this way. If somebody is going to go to the electric chair, right, and you kill him before, are you a murderer? No. So he's saying that these people, under Jewish halachic law, the Ramban says, since they were evil, they did adultery. He said we know clearly that they were idol worshippers and people that committed sexual sin, which is one of the 7. Right? So he says what propelled Yaakov's son to kill them was to take revenge. You understand? So he says that's why they killed the king and all his, and his entire city. Ki hayu avadav saresev lemashma'ato, which means what? It means that. So he's saying that it was like father, like son, like prince and king, the people. He says all of these people were from the same cut. They were all rapists. They would all. You're saying the fact that they're. You know how Sodom, everybody was the same corrupt way? The Ramban is understanding these people of Shechem were just evil. They were rotten, of rotten character. So he says, and he says, don't think, maybe you'll say no. They were good. They were so polite and condescending. They all did milah.
Right.
So the Ramban says, no, don't be tricked by that. You know why? Because he says it wasn't ma'azanillah. He says it wasn't for the sake of heaven. It was just they
For money.
For money. They knew that they were going to be able to have commerce,
right,
and get rich. They just did that to flatter the Jews. And
right.
I mean, also, like, in those days, if you wouldn't listen to the king and prince, you'd get into big trouble, you know. So the king and prince wanted the whole city, to do this, so they went along with the scheme. But they definitely did not do this for the sake of heaven.
Right.
So he says, why did Yaakov Avinu get so mad at them after?
Right.
That was your question.
Yes.
He says, so both according, let me make something clear. Both according to the Ramban and the Rambam, right? Shimon and Levi were not murderers. They had halachic permission to kill these people. The Rambam says because they didn't enforce court system, right? The Ramban says no. These people were evil. They were idol worshippers, pagans, right? They weren't keeping any of the mitzvahs of the 7 to not do idol worship or not do sexual sin, right? But what compelled them to kill them was they wanted to take revenge for them raping. So why was Yaakov mad? Because Yaakov said, this city has a treaty with other cities, and now you put me in danger. Because now the other people can say, oh, you killed our allies, now we're going to get back at you. And that's why he cursed them. Mipnei she'asu la'anshei ha'ir Hamas. Which means Yaakov did not like it. Maybe like you were saying, he did tshuva. He didn't like the fact that they tricked them. Oh, come. You know, they were they were not being very fair. They made them do the brit and then they stabbed them in the back.
All right.
So according to the Ramban, that was the part of the story Yaakov didn't like at all. If you want to kill them, kill them. But why
trick them?
Why trick them? So, and the Mefarshim here say, B'zeh shamanu lachzor b'tshuva. And he says there's a second reason Yaakov Avinu didn't like it. It says down in the footnotes, because they could have made them do tshuva, which means now that they had gone through the Brit, so the Shavatim could have went to them and said, renounce your idol worship, do teshuvah, and don't. You know how Yonah was sent on Kippur?
Correct. Give them a chance.
Give them a chance. It was very you know.
Yeah, they
it was underhanded what they
really
did.
Never had that chance. Now, I was for the massacre. Now I'm
no, and the third thing is
that maybe they should have had a chance.
And secondly, Yaakov didn't appreciate the fact that the people of the city had not done anything bad.
And did they have a chance to be told, hey, justice needs to be enforced with your prince?
Right.
And then did they still refuse?
No, because they lied to them also. Yaakov didn't like it that his sons were being tricksters and lying. They said, if you do the brit, we'll become one. But their whole scheme was from the beginning to kill them all out. Yaakov didn't like this. That's why he cursed them. You understand?
Right. For being sons of Yaakov and grandchildren of.
This was not honorable.
Of Yitzchak.
You understand? I like this Ramban. It's a very nice Ramban.
It's not the.
It's a different thing.
Yeah, it's not the Jewish way.
It's not the Jewish way, because Yaakov is also emet. Yaakov, I mean, even though in the Torah it seems that he was, but here you see that he didn't like it, and he says, listen, these people trusted Yaakov's sons, right, and went along with their plan, and now they backstabbed them. Yaakov didn't like it. This is like,
This is mafia style.
He says maybe they would even do tshuva.
And they even gave like the Brit a bad name. They used the
They were abusing.
They used something good to achieve something not good.
Exactly. So the Ramban, I like the Ramban.
Something holy.
Yeah, they lose something holy to trick the people.
Here, hold my Torah, God forbid. And then shoot the guy.
Right, exactly. They took advantage of them. According to the Ramban, I think I'm understanding like this. The fact that they were never murderers, but the way they did it was like very underhanded and dishonest. And he says, first of all, that's why when he curses Shimon and Levi, he says, Kali Hamas mechuratam. Yaakov, it could be also believed that, exactly. Yaakov did not like the fact that it kind of a little bit was a chilul Hashem.
Right. Any explanation of what should have been done? Anyone has any opinions? What would have been the correct manner? Just take Dina and go back, or try to have them trial?
No, so I think they could have done one of many things. They could have, first of all, one option would have been that they could have told these Chamor become Jewish. Not only, you know what I'm saying?
Right.
Another option would have been that we don't want to. See, if they would have said, no, we don't like you people, you raped our sister, and then if they wouldn't kept her captive, then that would be
grounds for
a war.
Right.
But none of that happened.
Right. Never got to that.
Never got to that. And it says, "Ve'im na'amin besefer mechot bnei Yaakov hayem mefaged avim shechnu Shem na'asfu v'esav imayim shlish ma'chomot gedolot." And he says, listen, one of the most dangerous things, even for Israel to this day, this is very interesting, I like this, Ramban. It says that you never want to battle on many fronts, It was very dangerous if Israel has to, do the northern against Hezbollah, and then from, that it's a very precarious situation where you have to have a war on many different fronts.
Of course.
Yaakov was afraid that Esau would have got into the mix now.
Right.
And would have came and attacked him.
Any knowledge of where Shechem is from? Or any lineage of past?
Shechem is the city that Yaakov ended up giving to Yosef.
Right.
It's in Israel.
Do we know where it came from? These people were from where?
I think they were Semitic. I think.
I wonder. There may actually be something interesting where Shechem is from and why.
Yeah. So he says, so now according to Ramban, you know why Yaakov didn't participate in the war. Because he didn't like their whole methodology of it. It was dishonest and
what was
it was a big lack of integrity.
Sorry, a little bit tangent. What was the last city that Hashem destroyed with the Sodom and Gomorrah cities, the 4 or 5 cities, and one of them was spared? Is that very far from Shechem?
No, I don't know. Could be. It says the Midrash says b'Pirshon HaPasuk, Asher lakachti miyad ha'meori b'charbi v'kashti v'kamu nisechsu gozim v'dares chagag kli mechamto kenegdam. So that Yaakov eventually did have to fight, though. You know that. Because what ended up happening is that Yaakov was attacked by all the allies of Shechem. So that's why he tells Yosef, I'm going to give you this city because I won it from the Amorites, Becharbi v'kashti, with my arrow and my sword.
Oh, they did end up fighting?
So, yeah, of course.
I didn't know that.
I'm saying, you have to understand, that region saw a whole city wiped out. These people's comrades came and attacked.
So
that's why Yaakov was mad.
Was right then.
Yeah. Yaakov is saying, we're one tribe. These people have many comrades. They ended up winning the war, but it was a dangerous war.
Right.
And it was not only against one family. And it says the Torah really doesn't go into this, but you should know. The Ramban says something also very interesting. He says you should know that Yaakov Avinu's sons were like him. You know how last week's Parsha, it took many shepherds to take off the rock from the well, but Yaakov just popped it like a soda pop.
Right.
Here also, he says that you should know that Yaakov Avinu's children were extraordinarily.
I always tell my kids these are the superheroes.
Yeah, they were very, very, very strong warriors.
The Avengers.
So he says, always, he says that, by the way, he says that a lot of miracles happen. Did you know that?
No.
He says when they wiped out Shechem, they got attacked by many people. The Ramban says. The Midrash says this. And he says, miraculously, just like Abraham was saved from the fire of the furnace of Nimrod, and always, he says, he's trying to say that just like God did miracles for Abraham and Yitzchak and Yaakov, he did miracles for the Shvatim also. So he says, we don't really, the Torah doesn't go into this war that happened with the comrades and allies of Shechem, but he says it was a serious war. It was many different tribes attacked Yaakov and his children. And, and he says it was, he says, but Hashem helped it that kind of they all weren't able to attack simultaneously, the allies of Shechem, because it says they would have been outnumbered like the sand of the earth.
Wow.
So he says Hashem backed them up somehow. One by one, they took out all these people that wanted to attack them. But he said it was a miraculous war. The Torah doesn't go into it, but that says why Yaakov was upset. He said, "Why did you
put me in danger?
And then I had to fight all these different."
Right.
Nations. Ultimately, you should know, but the Shechem has a very bad mazal. You should know all the bad bachtis, the tragedies of the nation of Israel start from Shechem. That's where idol worship was.
Later on in history as well. And I guess
that's the city where they started Yeravam ben Nevad, the antithesis of Shlomo's son. Rechavam, he broke off the thing.
I wonder why. Like I said, there must be something about Shechem.
Yeah, Shenaflu alehem, we're almost finished. He says, Shenaflu alehem, so he says Yaakov was terrified that he had to fight all these different city nations. He says that the Torah right after this says that Yaakov came shalem after this, to lose. So after Shechem, he went to the Torah says that a great miracle happened here, the Ramban saying, that you should know, even though they had all these different wars with these different comrades and allies of Shechem, not one of Yaakov's children or grandchildren were hurt. So that's kind of going into the whole idea of what happened here. But I'll just end off with an interesting thing. It says sometimes if two people have an argument, both of them could be right. You know why? Because it says Yaakov Avinu, when he gets mad at the tribes, my rabbi's wife's grandfather said this. He was one of the Gedolim of America, Rabbi Yankov Kamenetsky. He says, the final discussion Yaakov has with his kids about this episode is, how could you do this? Right? You put me in danger. And we just saw the Ramban says it was kind of like a mini world war. All these different people attack Yaakov.
Right. All out war.
All out war. It may have been like dozens of different tribes came and attacked Yaakov because Yaakov's children had wiped out all the men from his city. But he says, you know what the final thing is? He says, the tribe said, how could we let our
daughter be treated like a harlot?
Like a harlot. And Yaakov doesn't respond. So he says,
they're both right.
In a way,
wow.
Sometimes
right.
They were both right. Because there's a whole pshat to this, that there is
no clear
they wanted to put a precedent that nobody's allowed to.
Yeah, imagine that they didn't. They just took the girl and walked out. What would that show?
No, they're trying to say, don't mess with the best. Which means we Jews have no tolerance for people raping.
For this type of behavior.
Yeah. And that's kind of the idea that Yaakov did not have a response to that because our nation, that's the whole fight of Hanukkah. That's, by the way, just to lead into Hanukkah, this is the whole reason the Maccabees, even though they were outnumbered 1 to 100, decide to kill the Greeks. Because one of the things the Greeks used to do was they used to rape
the brides
on the night of her
chuppah, right?
chuppah. So it's a similar idea that this
Right.
is, we Jews are a holy nation.
Intolerable.
Yeah.
Don't
So it's a fascinating thing that, just to end off the class, that sometimes both people could be right.
Right.
In the
Very
way,
nice point.
Yaakov was right that
Very nice point.
Yaakov was right that, you know,
Right? Not necessarily.
but in their conscience. So now we want to go back, and in the conscience of the tribes, they believe that, you know,
Can't do that.
our daughter is being treated like our sister is being treated like a harlot, like a prostitute, and this is not the way we do business. You do this, you're going to be taken out.
Exactly.